Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne Whale. From giants right down to fairies, of both the trooping and solitary, and those who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka fireside, the Marrow fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside. Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside we take a story from folklore or mythology, retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olahan. I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 48 of Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. We are coming to you as always from the beautiful surroundings of the Head Stuff Podcast Network studios right here in Dublin. It is, I hope you all had a very, very spooky, very folklorish Halloween, one and all. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, you're very welcome along. If you're a returning listener, thank you so much for your continued support. Please do follow us on Instagram at Fireside Bard. It's always the best place to get updates on everything to do with the podcast. And if you really would like to, please do continue to leave ratings, subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and do leave ratings and comments. They really do help us boost up through the charts and make this podcast everything it can and should be. We are doing a live show. It is next week from the time that this podcast will be released. This episode will be the last episode released before the podcast festival. We are performing in the Dublin Podcast Festival, the Fireside Sessions live show, which will be an evening of storytelling of folklore, mythology, some true tales, and even some music, some songs. It is a BYOB evening right here in the brand new venue of the podcast studios here in Headstuff in Dublin on Sunday, November 10th at 7 p.m. Come along to the Fireside Sessions for tales, tunes, and a tipple as we really welcome, as we say goodbye to the autumn and really welcome in the winter. Get in out of that winter cold and come in and sit with me by the fireside and let me tell you a few tales and sing you a few songs. It's going to be a fantastic evening. Tickets are extremely limited, the last few available now, and they are available through ticketmaster.ie, or you can find a link to that on my Instagram at Fireside Bard, all one word. That is the Fireside Sessions, November 10th, Sunday, November 10th at 7 p.m. Tales, tunes and a tipple right here as part of the Dublin Podcast Festival. And this is a very special episode because this is we are moving on to now something that basically this podcast has been building towards since its inception. Because since day one, we have been making our way through the 4 cycles of Irish mythology, and we are now starting our 4th and final cycle. And chronologically, this cycle should have been second, but this is the big one. It's the most well restored, it's the most well known, and from my research so far and really delving back into it and starting to adapt it, I have a feeling this is going to be the best one of all. This is the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology. This is the story of the Táin, of Queen Maeve, of Cullen, of Conchobar, of Deirdre of the Sorrows, of just countless other incredible characters already. And it's chronologically, this should have come second, as I said, but I really knew that I wanted to have as much of the year of writing and adapting these episodes and these stories. I wanted to get as good as I could and as confident as I could in adapting these stories before I tackled the Ulster cycle. Because there's the one that there are the most amount of sources for, and this is the one that people know the most. People will have some expectations of it. And also, there doesn't really get much better a climax of mythology than the Táin. The Táin is considered the Irish Iliad. It is considered the greatest of our stories, and let's see when we really delve into it, we'll see if it really is, and if my adaptation of it is in any way up to snuff. But we're starting with before the Táin, because the Táin itself is just one epic story, or one epic series of stories that form part of the Ulster cycle, but there is a lot more to the Ulster cycle than that, and this is where it all begins. It begins with the birth of Conchobar mac Nessa and with the pangs of Ulster, and I'm going to chat to you a lot more about where I'm adapting these sources from and about a bit of the background to the Ulster cycle, but I'm going to start off with the story itself to really get the ball rolling. This is the story of Conchobar and the pangs of Ulster on Fireside. Conchobar and the pangs of Ulster. Once there was a princess named Nessa. She was daughter of XLVIII, king of Ulster. When Nessa became a young woman, she would sit on the hill outside her father's keep and take in the kingdom. One day there was a druid named Conchobar walking through the plains, and the young princess called out to him, "You there, druid, what is this day lucky for?" "As it happens, your highness, this hour is for begetting a king or queen." "Is that so?" "Why, yes. Anyone conceived today who ascends to the throne will be known in Éire forevermore." And Nessa took one sweeping look across all her eyes could see, and she could not see one other man in the vicinity. So the princess turned to the young druid and said, "Well, I suppose you'll have to do so." And Nessa took Conchobar by the hand, took him inside her home, and had very pragmatic and perfunctory sex with him. And this was no scheme that Conchobar was plotting. It wasn't as if he roamed the plains of Éire, telling beautiful young women if they slept with him their sons would be king, although he probably could have gotten away with that for a good while. The druid's prophecy was sound, and Nessa became pregnant. The baby grew inside her for 3 years and 3 months, and she was ensured this lengthy gestation period was all to enhance the baby's future greatness. Eventually the child was born, a son, whom Nessa named Conchobar. Soon after the baby's birth, Nassa's father Yuki was killed fighting for the High King of Ireland at the Battle of Letterua. Rather than passing to his own family, the throne of Ulster instead went to Fergus mac Roch. Nessa took her newborn child and moved in with Conchobar. For the first 7 years of his life, Conchobar was raised and educated by his birth parents to be the king they felt he was destined to be. But, without any connection to the throne, how was this going to happen? Well, after 7 years, Fergus mac Roch still hadn't married a wife. The duties of ruling preoccupied him too much, but one day it was suggested that he marry Nessa. "Daughter of the previous king, it's a good clean match, keeps the bloodline nice and pure," his advisors assured him. Nessa was not only of noble birth, but also happened to be incredibly beautiful, so it was not hard for Fergus to warm to the idea of this match and fall in love with Nessa. The former princess was brought before the king. "Marry me, and our children will rule Ulster." "I already have a son," said Nessa. "What happens to him if I marry you?" "I will adopt him, and he shall have my protection. He will not bear my name or inherit my titles, but he will be safe from harm." "That's not really good enough." "Well, what would you have that in my power I could provide?" Nessa was cunning, but also realistic. She knew there was no way that Fergus would allow Conchobar to inherit the throne should a child of his own blood be born. But in her head, a grand plan began to form, and Nessa offered a compromise. "Will you allow my son to be king for 1 year? Then you can reclaim your throne and pass it on to your own stock, but Conchobar's children will still be sons and daughters of a king of Ulster." Fergus mac Roch thought this over. His advisor whispered in his ear, Conchobar is only a child. Give him the throne. He will have the title, but everyone will know you are still king." With this assurance, Fergus granted Nassa's request. The two slept together, and the 7-year-old Conchobar MacNassa became king of Ulster. Immediately after the child took the throne, Nassa began plotting to assure he stayed there. She hired a Robin Hood-esque band of rogues and ruffians to pillage, plunder and thieve half the population of Ulster before donating all they had taken to the other half. Nassa also, on behalf of Conchobar, donated all the gold and silver in her possession to the warriors of Ulster, as payment for past and future wars. When a year was over and Fergus tried to reclaim the throne, the people of Ulster unanimously told him, "We'll have to think about that one." To the Ulstermen, Fergus had traded them like livestock, and all to win the heart of a woman, whereas Conchobar had been generous to them, giving them all he had. They felt he had their best interest at heart and should remain on the throne. Nassa's plan had worked perfectly. Fergus MacRoch was forced to give up all future claims to the throne, and Conchobar cemented his rule as King of Ulster. As Conchobar grew in age and size, so too did the worship given to him by all of Ulster. Every day he was taught by his mother until he was the wisest man in the province. His temperament proved ideal for the role of king. He was never quick to make a decision. He would always weigh up every conceivable option until he was certain. He was also one of the most adept and natural warriors, but he was never allowed into battle because he had not yet produced a son. Every soldier and warrior was more than happy to die for this king. Every wedding that took place, Conchobar would be offered the opportunity to sleep with the bride before the husband, so that he would always be first in every Ulster family. The same was also true whenever he was offered a bed in any home. If he so chose, he could sleep with the woman of the house. But many years into his rule, a great fair was held in Ulster. The main event of this festival was a mighty chariot race. Every great racer was there, but when the terrain had been thoroughly beaten and churned up by the hooves of many a horse, it was King Conchobar MacNassa in his golden chariot, pulled by his great bulky steeds, who was the winner. And this was no fix. The Ulstermen respected Conchobar, and would have gained the king's own respect and not wrath should they have beaten his chariot. But Conchobar did have the best horses and chariot, and his chariot and horses had the best rider. Around this time there was a rich landlord of Ulster named Crinnoch MacAgamon. He was rich, arrogant and inconsiderate, like every landlord before and after him, right up to the landlord who owns the property dwelt in by your humble storyteller. When Conchobar won the chariot race and was declared the fastest racer in Ulster, Crinnoch piped up, "My wife is faster." This brief but potent statement sent a wave of shock through the fair and very quickly reached the ears of the Ulster king. Crinnoch was arrested and taken prisoner, and the Ulster warriors were dispatched to fetch the landlord's wife to determine the truth in her husband's statement. The wife of Crinnoch was named Macha, and when Conchobar's men arrived at her doorstep, they found her 8 months pregnant with twins. "I cannot race in any chariot. I am about to give birth." "Your children will grow up with no father if you don't." Crinnoch had given Macha a good life, but she knew well he was arrogant and boastful. In fact, the last thing she had said to her husband before he left for the fair was, "Don't be shouting your mouth off." As if that's something I'd do. And that's the exact kind of thing he did. Despite this, she hardly desired her husband to be killed, so heavy with the weight of the 2 babies, Macha made her way to the fair. The landlord's wife was forced onto a chariot and told to await the king. It was here she began to feel the pangs of birth. She pleaded to be allowed to talk to Conchobar privately, but she was refused. Failing this, Macha turned to the gathered crowd and implored, A mother bore each and every one of you. Please let me wait until my children are born." But the bloodthirsty, entertainment-hungry crowd would not hear her. So Macha made a proclamation that made them hear her. "I will place a curse on every one of you gathered here today. This land we raced on will be named for me and my children forevermore." Conchobar reached the plain, and the chariot race began. It was neck and neck across the entirety of the field. All the while Macha screamed and cried the pangs of labour. The finish line was reached, and it was Macha who crossed first. As she felt the agonizing final push, the scorned mother cried out, "All those who hear my cries on this day shall forevermore in their times of greatest difficulty feel these same agonizing pangs of childbirth for 5 days and 4 nights." For Macha was no mortal woman. She was one of a trio of gods, along with her sisters Bav and Nieman. Together they were known as the Morrigan, and they were the goddesses of war, famine, and death. And Macha's proclamation came true. For 9 generations there was a curse on the men of Ulster, that in times of difficulty they would be cursed with the pangs of labour. There were only 3 groups of people spared: the women, the young children, and a young boy named Satanta. And the place where the race was held was named Eamon Macha, the twins of Macha, which was anglicised as Navan Fort. The reign of Conchobar MacNassa, which started so strong, had now been tainted by Macha's curse. The first seeds had been sown, which would lead to the bloodiest war in the history of this land. To be continued. And that was the story of Conchobar MacNessa and the pangs of Ulster on Fireside. And it has begun. The die is cast, the seeds are sown. That is the first tale of the Ulster cycle, or the first 2 tales, really. So, the sources I've used for all previous folk tales and myths adapted on this podcast, they've been varying sources, but 2 of the Gospels, of course, had been W.B. Yeats' Book of Fairy and Folk Tales and Lady Gregory's Complete Irish Mythology. So Lady Gregory has an entire, basically her book on Irish mythology is split into 2 halves. The first half is every other mythology in Ireland, and then the second half is all just Cuchulainn, is all just the story of the Táin. And while Lady Gregory has been gospel particularly for the mythological and the Fenian cycles, because she doesn't really cover the historical cycle, and they've been really fantastic as densely written in their Kiltartan English, as she called it, as they are. And her Cuchulainn story doesn't quite hold up as well, for one very simple reason, and that's because she greatly sanitizes it. The Táin is about as bloody and filthy and mouldy a story as you are ever likely to hear. There is a lot of talk of bodily functions, of sex, of violence, of just everything that we consider ourselves so desensitized to now, which of course in 1895 or 1902 I think is when she released Cuchulainn of Merhivna first. We're so desensitized to it now, but of course it would have been a much more conservative time back then. But Lady Gregory didn't think that people would be interested more so. She didn't think that that side of the story was worth preserving, despite the fact that that was a huge and very crucial part of every Old and Middle Irish adaptation and telling of the Táin right back. The Táin is thought to be set around the time of the 1st century. Cuchulainn is often paralleled with Jesus Christ, that he lived around the same time as that. So, but it's the 1st century AD that we're talking about. But evidence of the Táin being written down starts around the 8th century, between the 8th and 12th century. 12th century is where we have one of the strongest complete versions of it. But of course, it orally would have probably been told, any time after the 1st century up to the 8th century before they started to write it down. So it is as old as it gets. And it's incredible that it has survived as well as it has through so many translations, adaptations. And who we today most have to thank, I think, for how much we still know this story, even though so many Irish people, myself included for a long time, lived in an embarrassed ignorance about a lot of Irish mythology, because we hear about these characters in school a little bit, but we don't ever study any of them really. But it is an Irish poet named Thomas Kinsella who in the 70s, I think late 60s, early 70s, he adapted the Táin into English. And he is kind of why, according to Ciarán Carson, who did another adaptation of the Táin more recently, Kinsella is basically why we know it as the Táin, rather than An Táin Bó Cúailnge as it would be in the Irish. So Thomas Kinsella basically made this story accessible for everyone, but he also restored it to its full-blown, bloody, gory, sexualized piss and shit glory that it should have been. And it is spectacular for it. And he had it illustrated in these brush paintings by Louis Le Brocq, who was one of the greatest Irish artists of all time. He actually went to the same school as me, obviously at very, very different times. I think did Louis Le Brocq die not too long ago? He lived like a crazy long time. I think he was like 102 or something. Because he was born, I think he was born in 1916, Louis Le Brocq. Great name. Not a name you would normally associate with an Irishman, of course. Oh, he died in 2012. He was 95. Still a very, very long life. But I digress, because he does these series of brush paintings in the Táin, which are my favourite illustrations in any book ever. They're absolutely stunning. I want all of them tattooed on my body, particularly a brush painting he does of the Morrigan itself, in the battle crow form. If you can't get your hands on a copy of Louis Le Brocq's Táin, his illustration of Thomas Kinsella's adaptation of the Táin, then just do yourself a favour and just Google Louis Le Brocq Táin brushstrokes and just watch some of them there. Actually, it was amazing because I have a lot of these books in hard copy, but I got a Kindle last year, which has really saved my ass, particularly writing this podcast on the go, just being able to have loads of my books on that. And I recently re-downloaded a couple of editions of the Táin onto the Kindle, and the one of Thomas Kinsella's one, it actually has the illustrations included in the Kindle version, which is really nice. It's really great to see them even in the pixelation of the Kindle. But what's been nice about going back to the Thomas Kinsella adaptation of the Táin, because last year I'd read the Thomas Kinsella version when I was in school. I studied classical studies outside of school when I was in secondary school, and the Táin was on the syllabus, but I never studied it, but I just read it in my spare time because I bought it thinking I would use it. And Ciarán Carson is another writer who did the more recent Penguin Classics version, and that's probably the shortest version of it, and it's really, really snappy. It's great. It absolutely flies along. And he treats Thomas Kinsella as God, basically, but adapts his own version. He doesn't try to make it different for the sake of it. He doesn't have an ego as a writer in terms of wanting to put his own stamp on it. But it's a really swift, really snappy, very fresh adaptation of it that's brilliant, that flies along. But what Thomas Kinsella's version has, they both have incredible introductions, but the Ciarán Carson version is just the Táin story itself, whereas Thomas Kinsella gives a brilliant guide in his introduction about the stories that lead up to the Táin. And I want to adapt the whole Ulster cycle because there's so many good stories in it. And there is a lot in the Táin that you kind of just have to accept for granted, and it's really exciting now discovering the reasons for all of those. For example, you have an element in the Táin where the warriors of Ulster are just asleep and Cuchulainn is the only one who's not, and Cuchulainn single-handedly has to defend Ulster from the armies of Connacht. Whereas here you start to see, you have this incredible story of the pangs of Ulster, of this curse placed on the men of Ulster by the Morrigan, that in times of strife and war and battle, that they will be given the pains of labour, which is just this incredible, like totally original, unheard of in anything else kind of curse that I adore so much. And already you can see this is one of the single greatest things about the Ulster cycle, is these are the greatest women characters, particularly as we've already seen. We get this introduction with Nasa, and then we have Macha placing this curse. We're going to meet Deirdre of the Sorrows. We're going to meet Queen Maeve. These are incredibly fleshed out, vengeful, savage, unreal female characters to go alongside the incredible male characters as well, of course, like Cuchulainn. And we meet Conchobar here, whose ascent to power and his birth is more interesting, I would think, than him as a character necessarily. But I think that's just because I've been so saturated on this not saturated, but we've had a lot of stories about kings, because that's literally what the entire historical cycle was just talking about king after king. So I was hesitant to open this with just another story about the birth of another king, but that's why I incorporated it with the story of the pangs of Ulster. Those were two individual stories that I meshed together and I think worked together. In terms of how I'm going to do the podcast now for the next few weeks, obviously I usually do myth, folktale, which has been a little bit more broken up since I did the 2 episodes on King Sweeney. The last 3 weeks have been Halloween. We had the 2 Halloween folktales, and then we had the Halloween special last year with the readings of different horror and gothic tales, which I hope you all enjoyed. But with the Táin and with the Ulster cycle, there is an awful lot to cover. There's a lot of stories. There are 7 stories before the Táin even begins. Now I have amalgamated 2 of them already, and I'm sure a couple of the rest of them will build in together as well. But there's a lot to cover, and it's a lot of really, really good stuff. So, and we're coming to the end of the first year. Now, of course, it's not like we get to 52 weeks and then I move on. You know, we're going to go until the Ulster cycle is finished, in terms of Irish mythology anyway, and then we'll regroup and make a plan of what we'll cover after that. But I do want to keep the folktale element, because I do think it is a huge part of this podcast, because the folktales are so often bring a lightness, and they're usually what I would end up adapting and putting my own stamp on more so, because they're more bones than tight plot, whereas the Táin is very well preserved, and of course it's going to be in my voice and there is going to be my version of it, but I would pride myself on never changing anything just for the sake of it, and if the stories are perfect as they are, I'm not going to change a huge amount of them. I mean, you guys can let me know what your thoughts are on that as well, of course, on how we're going to proceed. But I'm thinking that it is going to have to be nearly all focused on. It's nearly going to be the Ulster cycle from here on out for the rest of the year, particularly. I mean, I do want to include, hopefully, as we enter the Christmas season, some Christmas folk tales. And there are also folktale offshoots of the Táin, because there are so many stories of Cuchulainn. And in a very similar way to the very first episode of this podcast, which is the story of the Giant's Causeway, being a story about Fionn McCool that is in no way associated with the Fenian cycle, we will have some folktale equivalents of that and some offshoots. We'll see how we go, but there definitely is becoming more and more of a plan of a very strict regiment of how the stories are going to go for the rest of the year, and it's very, very exciting. can't believe I'm here. When I started adapting the Ulster Cycle Cup over the weekend, I couldn't believe that I was finally here and that the daunting task was unavoidable now that we're on it. But it's so exciting. The characters and the stories are so good straight away. I love them anyway, and I hope you do too, and continue to love them. So I'm going to wrap things up there. I had a nice little bit of a ramble there that I hope made sense, and you get what I'm trying to do here. But I hope you really enjoyed the story of Conchobar and the Pangs of Ulster. Please do continue to follow us on Instagram at Fireside Bard. Please do come to the live show, Fireside Sessions, Sunday, November 10th at 7 p.m. in the podcast studios here at Headstuff in Dublin. Tickets are available at ticketmaster.ie/Fireside Podcast. Last few of them available now. The next episode I record will probably be before the podcast festival, but it won't be released until afterwards. So I hope a few of you can make it along to that. It's going to be a great night. I'm really, really looking forward to it. It's the biggest thing this podcast has done, and I think it'll really broaden our reach and help us take this podcast even further and further. I want to start doing more and more and more live shows and incorporating more live music and mixing the stories with the music to do things and start incorporating more of my own stories as well, to do all the things that I think can only really be done live. There are things that work incredibly well in the podcast that won't work as well in the live shows, but I'm really excited to let the live shows become their own thing, and I hope that you enjoy them too and come along to them, and that they help this fireside to continue to burn. So thank you so much, as always, to the folks here at Headstuff, to Alan, Paddy and Connor, to Jamie, my producer, for continuing to edit this podcast. And next week we will continue with the story of Deirdre of the Sorrows, one of the biggest, heaviest hitters of all. And I will see you all, you will hear me all next time round the fireside. Thank you and good night.
This podcast is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network.